Grit Crusaders. I am Brooke Plack, your host here today on the Grit Crusade podcast. And thank you so much for joining me. For those of you that may be your first time, sometimes it's just me and you, like today. And some days I have really great guests on here too. So be sure and check those out after you finish listening to this podcast. Today's episode is very unique in that, well, really, in kind of two ways. But first is it's the second episode in a multi-part series. So I have a little mini series I'm trying out. When you're new to the podcasting world, like me, sometimes you try out different things and see what your audience likes to listen to. And I'm always talking for the heart, from the heart. So GRIT stands for getting real in the trenches of life, relationship, and business. And so today we're going to talk about relationships. So I feel like I do a lot better at life and business than the relationship thing sometimes, especially when it comes to friends and our social life. So, this mini series is about work life flow. So, you may have heard people talk about work life balance, which I feel like is something that may not actually truly exist because balance, like, kind of gives us this, faux idea of equality. And I feel like work life flow is such a better way to describe it because sometimes there's seasons of busy in work. Sometimes there's season of busy in life. And I feel like everything has a season. And so figuring out what that flow looks like for you is really the ideal because what I deem is my, ideal work life flow or how things go in my life is different for you. And it's truly different for all of us in different seasons because sometimes the things that made us happy or the things that we were aiming towards 2 or 3 years ago, so much happens in life, and life is complicated. And frankly, it's hard. And our desires and preferences, they can change, and that's okay. You don't have to want to live where you live or do the work that you do forever. You can change your mind, but it's ultimately up to you and your responsibility to make that change. And so sometimes I find people are, they don't like their work or they don't like their life or whatever, and they want to blame it on their boss or their spouse or their kids, busy schedule. And like, hello, it's all your responsibility. You work for yourself. You don't work for anyone else. I don't care if you go in and punch in and out every day at a job. Something my dad has always taught me and all of his employees, and I try to pass this on to my staff too, is you don't work for me. You don't work for the company. You work for yourself in service of the mission. And so the work that you do every day is in service of either your own mission or someone else's mission. And you're the one that determines how much output you give. You determine what kind of energy you put into that. And so your work life flow is going to be different if you're living a mundane, meh life, showing up every day, working for something and towards something you don't really care about, the people you don't really care about, versus somebody who's zestful and excited and feels triumphant when they get reach that goal. And it may be working at a gas station. You may absolutely love convenience stores. I have this really weird obsession that no one knows about with convenience stores, and I think the way they set up the end caps is really unique. And I love that they meet a quick need for people, like in transition time between here and there. People can jump, run in, run out. There's no long term commitment. Like convenience stores are fascinating to me. But for some people, that may be boring, and that's okay. You may run a car wash for a living, or you may run a multi-million-dollar corporation and have tons of people depending on you. But at the end of the day, your body carries around your soul and your mind, which is what our first part was about. And so you are in service of your own mission in life and creating that work life flow. So today's topic, this is the other reason why this episode's kind of weird, is I'm not super excited about talking about it because I'm not good at it. Oh, don't we hate talking about the things that we're not good at? It's always easy to, jump on the camera and tell you about all these things I've learned when I'm still wading through this mess of friends and social life. And so today, we're going to talk about work life flow. And like I said, our first episode was about mind and body. So if you haven't had a chance to check that one out, do that after you listen to this one or put it on your list to listen to for next week. But today's friends and social life is probably the last thing I wanted to talk about in this work life flow. But I was sitting in church several months ago, and our associate pastor was preaching, and I'm going to paraphrase what he said, but he said something to the effect of, like, you can't minister and love on other people when you're being a hermit and you're stuck at home. And so you can't create meaningful relationships if you're never reaching out. And so to do that, we have to put effort into that. But I think first we have to identify, what do we want that to look like? So vulnerability, transparency. Transparent, I tell you guys about things I've already been through. Vulnerability, I tell you guys about things that I've been through, am going through, and still in the middle of. And that's where I am with this whole friend social life thing. So, spoiler alert, I'm not very good at making friends. I know. Like, I'm social and I'm friendly, but like long term, meaningful connections have always been hard for me. And I don't know why. I think it might be that I'm one of those like extroverted introvert kind of people. And so I think it's important to say that not everyone is fueled by being around tons of people all the time. Okay. And some people like me need to be away from people to recharge. So I get very drained by being around lots of people for multiple days in a row or multiple meetings in a row. And then I need some time to retreat and be still because I've learned this about myself and figuring out, my flow. And so this looks different for everybody. So this episode is not just for people that are social butterflies. It's kind of for the rest of us who are still trying to figure out what that friends and social life looks like. So before we jump into the goodness of that, we have a segment we like to do here on the podcast. So if you're new, it's called Trivia in the Trenches, where I ask you guys a question. And when I have a guest here, our guest will answer. But today, since it's just me and you get to answer, but I don't give you enough time to look it up on Google. But while I'm mentioning that, if you don't follow us on your favorite podcast platform, please do click that plus button or that check mark. And if you're watching on YouTube or you haven't watched on YouTube yet, be sure and go and follow us on YouTube and click subscribe on the Grit Crusade, because we do offer YouTube versions of the podcast as well as audio only versions of the podcast. So here we go. Trivia in the trenches. This one's interesting to me. Are you ready? In what book was the famous spy James Bond introduced? Dun 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 dun. Casino Royale. I didn't know that. Like, I feel like I've heard of Casino Royale and I didn't know that. And this is what's even more interesting. It was written in 1953. I mean, I know we've had some hot James Bonds like over the years, and I have like me and Sean Connery. I had this like weird obsession with him when I was like a late teenager that should have been like a grandpa thing. I know because he was already old then, but he was always so hot. And there is nobody from my generation or the ones in front of me that can say Pierce Brosnan is not OMG been smoking hot our whole lives. He has. And so, and I know there's been a lot of James Bonds since then, but Ian Fleming was the author of Casino Royale, which was a British espionage book that quickly gained popularity. And then he wrote 11 more. I didn't know that. There's your useless facts for the day. So Casino Royale is where James Bond came from. And if you do know the answers, be sure to drop it in on Facebook or Instagram or on whatever platform you're looking for, because I want to know who actually knows the answers. And I don't know if you know when it's just me and you. So, all right. So let's jump back into our topic for today. And that is talking about our work life flow and friends and social life. So, first, I want to tell you about what happened to me and my whole friends and social life movement during COVID. So, I lost 3 friends during COVID and they didn't die. I know, right? And so I should probably be grateful that they are all alive, and I am. But one of my friends that I'm not friends with anymore, that I would still love to be friends with, I think, or I know, was a friend from over 20 years, like a childhood friend. And she lives in a different part of the world, and I won't try, or in the U.S., and I won't try to attest to why or why not things ended up the way they did. But losing a friend that you've been friends with for 20 something years is devastating. And one of the other ones was had been a customer of mine and then became like a part-time personal assistant for me, like running errands and stuff for me. And then some changes happened in her life and she ghosted me, like literally ghosted me. And we had been friends for like 4 or 5 years and I really liked her. I trusted her. And it was sad that I feel like, and I could be totally off base here, it's only one side of the story, but that she didn't, feel close enough to me that she could talk to me through these transitions in her life. And that's hard, when you feel like that you trust someone enough to share those parts of your life with them and that it's not reciprocated. And the last one was someone that I worked with for 6 years. And, um, again, another life transition and someone I talked to, like, almost daily was suddenly gone out of my life. And so that was all in the span of, like, 2 or 3 months. And so, I mean, like I said, I've not ever been good at making, like, lots of friends. I've never had a huge friend, like, circle of friends. I went on my senior trip with girls I really liked in high school. Like, I didn't have a tight group of friends in high school. I had a couple of friends that weren't necessarily, like, super good friends with each other, but I've always been more of, like, a solo friend kinda person, and not because I don't want them to have other friends, because I love that, and I love my friends, but I'm just not one of those people that has like this huge network of friends that I go on trips with and you see everybody standing on the beach together and you like I have multi-generational friends. I have friends that live in different parts of the US. But I don't have some big friend group. And that was something when I was younger that was hard for me to accept because I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, why do people not like me? Why do people not want me to be in a friend group? And um, I don't know if I have all those answers, but I do feel like I understand myself better now. I wasn't ever a great listener. I have ADHD. My brain was always running like 90 miles an hour. And so I feel like maybe I didn't follow up well. Like maybe I wasn't always present. Maybe I always had too much stuff going on. And frankly, like my parents didn't have a lot of friends. So I think that was the model I had. Like we weren't like huge friend group social people. And so for me to sit and talk to you guys about having a work life flow of friends and a social life isn't easy because I don't have some rock star like social life to show off, but I can tell you like the things that are important to me. And I think that's really the most important thing is that you have to figure out like what does a strong social life and friend network look like for you, you know? The Bible tells us in John 15 that to love each other as I have loved you. And I truly believe that meaningful human connection is a key part of human existence. And I don't think that we were meant to go through this life alone. It's hard, and it's a lot less hard when you have somebody else that can sit there with you and be in the hard with you, you know? But I also think that friendship and social lives look different for everybody. It's not always this, 20 people on a beach all taking pictures together. Like that's not always it. Sometimes it's just like you and your friend at a coffee shop or on your couch. Like it's not always some big showy Instagram thing. And so like I feel myself getting emotional talking about this because I don't feel like I've ever really talked to anyone about how I feel about this, but I think that you have to decide like what are you okay with? Like you don't have to be the girl or guy who is looks like they have like all the friends and everyone loves you and everyone wants to hang out. Like it's okay to have just one friend, but it's not okay to go through this life alone and you don't have to. And I think it's also important to choose what your social life looks like because again, we're talking about this work life flow and making choices in our lives and that we are our own responsibility. Like you get to choose. And like what is it you enjoy doing? Like maybe for some people taking their dog to the dog park and having a casual conversation with someone else, that's a social life for them. And that's okay. They love showing off their dogs and having a short conversation with someone can be very impactful and meaningful if you are present. Being with people on a week long vacation, a group of 20 people, and you're on your phone the whole time, or maybe it's someone else that's on the phone the whole time, just because you're there doesn't mean that you're connected. So I think making those meaningful connections and having those impact points in life has to do more with your intentionality and like your presence than it has to do with the number of people, the Instagram worthy vision of what everyone's seeing, and more about like do you really care and do you feel heard? Because I am a recovering fixer. And so I used to try to fix everyone. And like maybe that was hard. Maybe it was because I talked over people and I didn't know I talked over people because my mouth was always running all the time. And maybe I wasn't a great listener, but like these are things I've grown in. And now I intentionally choose the people that I want to spend time with and so, kind of where I'm at in my journey right now is trying to create a rhythm of that connection and friendship. And so, what that could look like is like maybe it's lunch every week with a coworker, and maybe it's a different coworker every time, or maybe it's the same one because you are not a people person and don't want to be around tons of people. And that's okay. But creating that divine connection with other people, and I'm not necessarily talking about romantically, which sometimes I guess things do evolve into romanticism, romantically. I don't know. Maybe sometimes things do evolve romantically. I think that's the one. Yeah. Former English teacher couldn't get that one worked out. But for the most part, I'm talking about things that are completely platonic here. But maybe going to lunch with the same person every week is, what is a great connection for you because you guys connect on a lot of levels and have that trust and can talk to each other. But maybe it's reaching out to different coworkers or family members or friends that you don't see very often and trying to once a month have a coffee date or sending a note in the mail or sending a text message when someone crosses your mind. That's something that I do a whole lot is anytime I think about somebody and they cross my mind, I feel like it's for a reason and a lot of times it's old customers that maybe don't choose my business anymore. And I text them anyway. And some of them probably don't like it. And I don't really care. And if they're listening to this podcast, they probably do like it. And they're just pretending like they don't care. And most people message back and say, thank you, or thanks for thinking of me. And I think it's just like getting out of our own heads and no longer feeling like that we have to, what are they going to think if I call and ask them to lunch? Well, I haven't talked to them in a long time. So what? It's okay. Like, go ahead and reach out. Like, be the one that's reaching out first and create a rhythm of that in your life. But don't fall trap like I did when I was younger of feeling like that your friends and your social life has to look like everyone else's because it doesn't. Like, it just doesn't have to look like everyone else's. And that's okay. And sometimes we have to like let ourselves out of our own expectation. I'm going to say that one more time. Sometimes we have to let ourselves out of our own expectation of what we thought things should be. And it's also asking yourself, like, how fulfilled do you feel? Like, maybe you feel great about your friends and social life. Maybe you're gamers and you guys get together and game on the weekends. And like, that's cool too. But in the midst of that, like, are you having those conversations of like, how's work going, man? Like, you can fit things in like that are so important because you would be so surprised how many times people go through life, me included, and no one ever says, like, how's it going? How are you? Like those things, and you really listen for the answer, like not just good, but like, how's the new job? Like, what do you like about it? Or how's the old job? What do you think you might want to change about it? Have you ever thought about leaving that company? Like having those like really targeted questions to people helps them know that you're there to listen, you care, and like you want for them to be able to have that trust with you. So I think when we're looking at creating this work life flow, even though I don't really want to talk about it, and I sat here today from not an expert, pedestal, but from someone who's living it with you of figuring out what do I want my social life to look like at the end of my 30s going into my 40s versus what I thought it should look like in my 20s and letting go of that should and realizing that my life is my responsibility and I am living for a audience of one. And God is really the only one that I have to perform for. And I need to remember that. And we all need to remember that this life is short. This go round, we just get one shot. And what do we want to do to make the best of it? And when is it okay to say, this is no longer serving me? And I need to let that go. I need to let that expectation go. I need to let that friend go. And sometimes friends leave your life, like in my case. And I don't know if I'm really over all of it or not. And maybe that's something that I need to work through. But I also don't want that to get in the way of me bringing new friends into my life and keeping them away for fear of like, but what if I lose a friend again? Because it's hard. It's really hard and you have to grieve that too as well. So, hope that you're enjoying this journey as we're going through this work life flow and talking about the things that we can take responsibility for and make changes in our life so that we can get closer to what we want that work life flow to look like throughout our lives. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Grit Crusade podcast with Brooke Plack. Our theme song is Thunder City by Lunar Ray, licensed through Soundstripe. This podcast was produced by Luminate Media Group. Thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.